Welcome to the Map It Forward podcast, everyone. Today, my guest is a dear friend of mine, Nick Kassouf. Nick, welcome to the Map It Forward podcast.
Thank you, Lee. It's good to be here.
It is really exciting, the discussion that we're about to have, because talking about behind closed doors is a conversation that I think a lot of people are having also behind closed doors, and I think we need to start having these conversations publicly. Now, when I've been thinking in how we lay out the structure for this conversation so that we get the best benefit out of it, I thought we'd start with a couple of things. Like, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. And then I think it's going to be important for us to lay out what our politics is so that people can get the frame of mind about how we're both coming to this discussion. So the very quick version of what this discussion is to do with reopening up local economies here in the US, and the conversation applies all over the world. Would you agree with that, Nick?
Yeah, I think that's spot on.
And so Nick and I don't agree or disagree on any of this.
Got it.
Right? And that, I think, is really important for us to state, that we are not here to have a debate, that one of us is on one side of the discussion and the other is on the other side of the discussion. The reason that I wanted to have this conversation with you, Nick, is because you see the grey like I see the grey. And I think that there are a lot of people that are choosing a side of this without exploring the grey. And there's a part of the grey that you see that I don't understand. And I'd like to explore your mind and understand how you got to where you're at with those things, so that I can better understand your perspective and challenge some of that, and you challenge my perspective, and just have a good old conversation like we always have.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about that?
I love our conversations.
Oh, me too, man. I feel so energized at the end of every conversation.
Right?
Jamming for days. Yeah, man. The thing is, like, when you talk with people who are not there to just prove their perspective right, like when you're in conversation with someone and you go at it with an open mind and an open heart, and you're like, oh, what can this person teach me? And still walk away and say, I didn't agree with everything that they said, but I do really respect the fact that they were open to listening to me and open to sharing their honesty with me. Because it's a trust, right? It's a vulnerability. But first of all, you showing up here to this discussion, to have this with me, I'm incredibly humbled and honored that you would step into that vulnerability. So thank you.
So it's a pleasure to be here, honestly.
So why don't we start by telling people what our politics is so that they can understand the frame that we're coming at this discussion from?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to take a more, I'd say, libertarian type centrist view on things. I took a lot of heat the other day because I posted on my Instagram in support of reopening certain things. And I guess I have to admit, like, maybe I wasn't super clear on it. I don't think that we should necessarily just reopen everything, balls to the wall, like, just forget about, this whole pandemic. But I think that we are not being methodical or logical in how we're doing things. And there's just some frustrating things going on politically and with local and state government. And I think that's something we should kind of look into, explore a little bit, dig into the data, see what it's saying. And I actually got a lot of messages from friends that were really upset at me. Like, I had people unfollowing me. I kind of took a lot of heat for it.
It was crazy to watch unfold in real time. Like, anyone who doesn't follow Nick, barista_Nick, and that's where you can find him on Instagram, and tell people what you do so that they understand, like, you have a horse in this race.
Yeah, that's actually something I wanted to mention because, yes, I'm part owner of a cafe and I own a juice bar as well. But this isn't really driven from personal motivation. I want to say that we've actually been really blessed and we've been doing okay. We've had a
It's great to
steady
hear.
source of business just with our local community have been supporting us. And, obviously business is down drastically, but we've managed to, stay afloat. We didn't have to lay off any employees. We cut hours, but everyone still has their job.
Great.
And, we've been really lucky in that sense. So this isn't coming from a personal, like, open back up so we can,
Yep.
make money again. It's more so, I see how other businesses are really struggling, and some are not going to reopen ever.
Right.
Um,
And we can explore that in a second. I have a question for you ahead of time. What do
yeah,
you vegetarian?
I guess I prefer less government intervention in everything. I think both sides are just going on to bigger and bigger government. It's just becoming this overwhelming force in our lives where government just controls every aspect. And I just worry that it's drifting away from that early vision of what this country was built on.
Okay.
And so,
And most people would look at that and say that, well, that sounds very Republican of you, but you identify with a centrist. And just for qualification, I consider myself a centrist and I consider myself a libertarian. So we have very similar politics on that perspective. And for people who are listening that are like, being a centrist is not a real thing. No, yes, it is. You can want the freedom to make decisions for your own life and have the freedom to decide what the fuck you want to do to your own body and have access to, but also want to make sure that people who are underprivileged and less able have their basic needs taken care of. That's essentially what my version of a centrist for me personally is. And I wanted to make sure that people understood with clarity what my politics were, what Nick's politics are, so that you can understand why we very clearly see the gray here. We're not on a team.
I think that's some of the danger of today's climate is everything is so ideological, and I think social media too drives us towards these extremes, and everybody's a part of their tribe, left or right, and it's becoming. I mean, this is something I think we're both fans of Jordan Peterson, who warns against the dangers of extreme ideologies, and that cuts on both sides. It's not a left or right thing. Any group can become highly ideological, and so I think if you're try to be a deep thinker and be careful, then you're going to fall somewhere in the middle, because there's good in on both sides. Yeah, everything's very nuanced. You got to be careful.
And before the liberals in the audience start saying, I can't fucking believe that Lee's a fan of Jordan Peterson, I'm a fan of anybody who's a deep thinker. I'm a fan of anyone who, I don't agree with everything these people say, but I do love anybody who's exploring ideas and challenging themselves in a thoughtful, considerate, compassionate way. And they don't let themselves get away with an ideology. Like, ideologies can be dangerous. And libertarian is the closest I've ever come to classing myself in any category of anything. So, and even that, it feels like a loose term. But when I say
it kind of is a loose term. I mean,
right.
I don't think we're true libertarians in like the absolute sense, since I think we both support like some amount of government policies helping the less fortunate, and
we should have a fire department, and the government should take care of doing that. We should have a police department, and the government should take care of all of the things that create a sense of order that keeps our local communities functioning, so that we can have a civil society, right? But I think that governments should be also responsible for creating a community that elevates everybody to a safe starting point. So I come from the perspective, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because this will be laying the ground for where we move forward with the discussion. There seems to have been lost this idea of team human for pushing the ideologies to either side and to greater extremes has forced people to be on a team rather than all together. And one thing that was very hard for me to get used to living in this country is it's a very individualistic society.
Yeah.
And we don't take care of each other here in America. It's just culturally not the way that the country seems to be flowing. Whereas if we had communities that were all about, if we elevate the most vulnerable people so that they're no longer feeling unsafe, they're no longer feeling destitute, they're no longer feeling impoverished, we all benefit. The long-term reward for investing in that risk of will it work or will it not work is worth it, in my opinion. Now this is where people are like, but she's not a real libertarian, because like clearly that's very liberal of her to say. Hence, I'm a centrist. What do you think of that idea, Nick?
I think it's a noble idea, and I think it's what honestly most people would say that they would strive for. But I think the difference a lot of times is that people have different ways of how they think we should go about achieving that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where, when I talk with, whether it's really liberal friends or really conservative friends or whatever, it's, a lot of times people all want the same outcomes, but they want to go about it by extremely different ways.
Okay.
And so I think that's where, I think, like you said, team human, I think a lot of people need to acknowledge that, ultimately, a lot of people want the best for, each other and for our country and for other human beings, but they think that the other side is going about it the wrong way. And I think we need to dig into that and see, how is this process that we're adopting to come to these outcomes? How is that going to, change society? How is this effect going to, play out in actuality? Because I agree with like all kinds of ideas, like I want free college and free healthcare and all that stuff. Like that's all fantastic, but at what cost do we achieve that, or how is it achieved in a reasonable way?
Right.
I think a lot of people that ask for these things don't understand
the
basic
economic.
Yeah, exactly. Like let's and this is also what ties in with this whole coronavirus situation.
Right.
Is I think a lot of people who have really good intentions and really mean well are not understanding the economics by what's happening. And so that's something that I think would be good to dig into.
Let's do it. Help me understand what your perspective is on what you've been saying about reopening.
Yeah, I also want to say beforehand, like my opinion has somewhat changed on this since I posted that, and that's something I'm okay with. Is
Oh yeah.
I don't want to stick to like one. If I've said something in the past, like I maybe will change my mind, and I'm not afraid to do that. And part of that was I had a former employee of ours, a really awesome person. She reached out to me privately and said that her mother had actually passed away from COVID-19 a couple weeks ago, and she shared her story with me, and it actually hit me really hard just hearing that from an employee of ours that we used to work with so closely.
I'm sorry for her loss.
Yeah, so it hits closer to home when you see someone's story of just what that was like, seeing their mother in the hospital and on a ventilator and all that. And so I get it. It's not, this is serious, and I don't want to discredit that at all.
And before you do dig into that, I want people, if you have any misconceptions about where either Nick or I are coming at from our perspectives, we're both open-minded people. We both see this as a very complex issue. We are not here to come up with any solutions. Yeah. We are here to explore this together. And our hope in doing this is that you will go and do the same with the people in your lives. We hope that you take this conversation as an opportunity to really appreciate that this is hard and complex and nuanced, and you can do this respectfully. Okay, so while Nick may say some things that I disagree with, and I'll say some things that Nick disagrees with. The point isn't, when you're having an intelligent conversation with someone, to prove the other person wrong. Show up with an open mind and saying, what can I learn from this person? And then we're going to start getting towards some semblance of like, okay, so maybe we could try this, or maybe we could try that. So, Nick, why don't you tell me what your perspective is on this situation?
Yeah, so I think we did a good job by locking down and taking the precautions that we did, but I think that some of the things we did were not carefully thought out.
Like what?
So some things, for example, they may seem like small details, but I don't understand why, smoke shops were allowed to stay open. I have 3 of them right here and, right next to us that are open selling, cigars and cigarettes and all this stuff. And then you can't go to the local park, or, you can't go to a beach, or, we were planning to go camping and the campgrounds were closed. You can't go golf where, you're literally by yourself. It's like the most socially distanced thing ever.
It really is.
So there's just different things that I feel like weren't carefully thought out. And the idea of closing the beaches just because he saw some photos, he meaning the governor, that looked...
For clarifying, I don't know if we mentioned this or not, Nick and I are both in California. Nick is in Orange County. I'm in San Diego. Governor Newsom is the governor of this state. And yeah, that's the context that people needed. Go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, sorry about that. I forgot that not everybody's in California.
It's kind of a Californian way for us to think.
Exactly. So, the beaches had been open, and according to the lifeguards, the local police, people were being, relatively good about social distancing and, being relatively careful. And there was some photos taken that showed the beaches really crowded. And I think what happened was that they were taken at an angle where everybody looks kind of compressed, like on top of each other, basically. And so kind of it seemed in a spiteful way, despite the local governments, the local cities deciding by their councils that, they wanted to leave their beaches open. Gavin Newsom overrode that and, ordered them shut. And again, I guess that falls back to that libertarian side of me where it's like, I think the federal government should stay out of the state's business, and I think the state should stay out of the local government's business too if they've decided, and they have their local authorities, the police, the lifeguards, handling that. I think we should trust them to to do what's right. So that kind of irked me a little bit.
Knowing your perspective on things, I can understand why that irked you. It immediately brings to mind for me one of these things of, we have the privilege of being people who, and I know that that's a very liberal term, but I'm using the term privilege in a different way. I'm not talking about it from a financial perspective. We have the privilege of being logical thinkers. That is a privilege. We've invested time in having the kind of, in considering other people's perspectives. We think about things, and we have the privilege of being able to do that. We've invested the work in doing that. We're reasonable, logical people who can see that if a pandemic is happening, this is the reasonable action that I need to take to keep me and other people safe. Something that has become really apparent to me is that how much of a privilege that is. Because we understand what's happening, we assume that everybody else understands that too. And I have been dumbfounded at the number of people who went, I have a local park just up here. It's about 2 minutes walk from my place. The police had to cordon it off to stop people from going in there. And I was talking to one of the cops and I said to her, why are you guys here? And she said, because people are having picnics. Lots of people are having picnics. They think this is a holiday. And I said to her, that's crazy. Don't they understand what's going on? And she said that a lot of people are not taking this seriously. And in pondering on that, I wonder if the privilege of not having had someone immediately in their family affected by the virus hasn't kicked them into the idea of understanding this is really serious. Much like you were saying that your perspective has changed a wee bit when you had it affect you a little bit closer to home.
Yeah.
And so it's not that people are being deliberately reckless or deliberately wanting to put other people in danger. It's that they don't have the privilege of the education or the understanding that we have to be able to understand why they should be taking this as seriously as they should be taking it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but I want to push back a little bit on that.
Please do.
Why, in your opinion, is it not okay for, like, say, a family who already probably lives together to have a picnic at the park? I mean,
I think that's acceptable if it was an isolated thing. But so here's where I think that the nuance and the complexity gets deep, right? When we think about this and we say, well, all right, I can see a family taking a walk or going for a bike ride down the street, right? And that's absolutely safe. Where it becomes dangerous is when there's another family that's walking in the opposite direction who also has the same frame of mind of like, but we all live together, right? And so when you put two families walking down the street or two families in a park that are having a picnic, that's still kind of safe if you can keep them separated. But what happens when we put 100 families in a park because the kids are getting restless? There's only limited public land, right? And there's a lot of people. And we shouldn't be telling families, well, we shouldn't. We don't want to be saying to families, we don't want you to be out having picnics. What we don't want to be happening is 100 families all at the same time having a picnic in a park. And that sort of kinds of lowers people's guards to the seriousness of this situation, right? And
I could see that, yeah.
So I absolutely see your perspective on the fact that there's nothing wrong with a family going and having a picnic. There's nothing wrong with two families going and having a picnic. But that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your area. I mean,
exactly.
In our area,
nuance, right?
we have a lot of parks here that are all somewhat closed. I think you're allowed to walk through them. And there's, even before they closed it, there wasn't that many people out. There was people walking and exercising and stuff, but I think if you look at the data, I was just reading a couple articles yesterday, actually, kind of delving into where we got this whole social distancing 6 feet thing. And there's really not a hard consensus on whether it's 6 feet or 3 feet or 20 feet. If we've heard well-respected people suggest multiple variations of how far people need to be apart. And I think when you're outside in the sunlight, we know that the sun kills the virus relatively quickly within a few minutes. And, when you're in a big open air space, I think the risk of, somebody walking by on the other side of the street or, whatever, 10 feet away from you and breathing the particles all the way over to you is pretty low.
Well, the thing is, we don't know, though. And this drives to the heart of the complexity. It's a variable that adds an extraordinary amount of complexity to this, is that the data doesn't exist. Even the data that we have I mean, anyone who listens to this podcast knows how big I am on data integrity, not just having data for the sake of having data.
The data is awful right now.
The data integrity is nothing we can count on. We don't know what the infection rate is. We don't know what the death rate is. We don't, there are some hospitals that are classing things as COVID deaths when they're not COVID deaths because the federal government is going to reimburse them for everything. Like there's corruption going on and there's, fuckery going on left, right, and center. The integrity of the data that we have is nothing that we can count on.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's part of what's driving my frustrations. So our governor said initially that he wants 25,000 tests a day.
Which isn't nearly enough.
Right. And I think we're achieving around that number now. And now it's about 80,000 a day that's being shot for, which is great. But that's still going to take several months to test everybody.
Right. And even once you've been tested in 2 weeks or even the next person you come in contact with, that test may be irrelevant.
Right. But here's the problem with those parameters being required for opening is it's giving us a skewed view of the numbers because let's just say hypothetically 10% of the people who are tested test positive.
Yep.
So if 25,000 people a day right now are being tested, then based on the limited amount of testing, you might get 2,500 new cases a day. And so right now we want to see 14 days of decline. But if the tests are ramping up at the same time, we may be getting an incline, an increase of positives. But in reality, that might just be due to the vastly higher number of tests, and we might actually be on the decline, and we might not know. And so this could drive this out for potentially months if we keep ramping up testing. And so we don't have an accurate view of what the numbers look like.
So why aren't people who are protesting, and I get you can't speak for everybody, but more people that are protesting than I do. You're the only person I know that's been protesting. So if we know that the data is completely unreliable, it's the best case they've got, and we can only work with the data that we've got. But if the data doesn't have integrity, we're still walking around with our eyes closed, essentially. We're making decisions and spending valuable resources on things that are like a good guess at this point.
Yeah.
Why aren't we protesting for better testing? Why aren't we protesting for better data? Why aren't we getting people who are saying the economy is going to fall down if we don't get back to work? Why aren't a lot of the more people who have access to, more resources than the average bear? That may be an Australian phrase. I apologize, but I hope that you get what I mean. Why aren't we pushing to get better data integrity?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's kind of the middle ground that I've come to with all my friends I've talked to is like I completely agree that we need better testing, more systematized, streamlined. Right now, it's as of like a week or two ago, it was still very hard to get a test. I called to get a test, and I didn't meet the right criteria. I needed some strict, you needed to be around this person or that, or have these symptoms. And I never had any symptoms, but I still wanted to get tested, and I couldn't. And so if we're wanting to test everybody, it shouldn't be this hard to get a test. I don't know if it's changed in the last week or two, but it needs to be more streamlined. And I think the reason people don't protest that is maybe one, they don't understand that that's important, or two, I think it's less immediate than just say like, let's just open everything up. Like, that's just like, you can just lift that and people think it'll go back to normal, which it's not going to. There's going to be a new normal for a long time.
I feel like we've hit this new normal, right? I feel like we're in this holding pattern, and we're essentially, from what local and state governments are saying, we're in this holding pattern until we can get good data. they're pushing, we have this term in Australia, pushing shit uphill.
I like these Australian terms.
Yeah, you're welcome. I like to bring some color to the conversation. We are pushing shit uphill with this because we are making decisions based on data that doesn't have even close to the level of integrity it needs to have. And so, next week I'm doing I'm leading a 3-hour workshop on leadership.
Yeah, I'm excited for that.
Thank you. I'm really excited about bringing the context of this conversation into that discussion because it really raises the question about when you trust or don't trust your leaders, it really creates a level of insecurity in you, particularly at times of uncertainty, right? And so there are some people who look at what Newsom is doing and saying, he's a great leader. And then there are others that are seeing the actions of what he's doing taking away from them, and they say he's doing a shit job. And I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. I am having a great time observing the way that people are responding to their leaders, because a lot of people are not questioning the intention behind that person's leadership. Now, that person's leadership may be great, depending on what perspective you're on, but I think we need to question the intention behind what our leadership is following, right? So
I think that's super important that you mentioned that, especially coming into an election cycle here.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you have to just assume that almost everybody is, politically jockeying for some sort of recognition or positioning for this upcoming election. So that's having a huge impact on how people and leaders, like you said, are making decisions. And, I'm sure if this was happened in 2018, it would be a much different response from, the federal and local governments, because people aren't afraid to do the right thing.
So help me understand. I would think, and perhaps this is a little bit of naivety on my perspective, so I'm so open to being schooled on this. I would think that the best possible outcome, even in an election year, is to get this job done really well.
Yeah, but there's multiple interpretations
of what really well is.
Exactly. So
help
like
me
you
understand.
said, for the people who, don't necessarily have anyone die that they know or aren't, affected health-wise in that sense, then very well might be preserving, the most money in their pocket or saving the economy.
Right.
For somebody who, like the person I know who lost somebody, very well might be minimizing the amount of deaths, and I think probably both sides want both, but one will weigh or lean more towards the other, depending on where their life circumstances lay.
But if we were to take like a state that had approached this very differently, like Florida. So Florida were very late to issue a lockdown or a shelter-in-place order.
Yeah.
And very quick to lift it. And I mean, the governor over there was kind of very relaxed about the whole thing. And then we're going to take another governor, which is the governor of Las Vegas, that turned around and said, we should just open it up. And if old people die, well, then they die.
Yeah.
So this is where I start to bring in this perspective of intentionality, right? I look at what Governor Newsom is doing, and I can see up against other governors his intentionality and his strategy. He's laid out what his plan is moving forward. And I'm not an anyone fan. I'm not a fan of any politician. I'm not against any politician. I want everyone to do the best fucking job that they can so that we save as many people and we get back to work as quickly as possible. Anybody who's sitting there saying, I hope that my leaders fail, you need to check your intentions.
For sure.
It's just not a team human perspective to take. But when I look at what he's trying to achieve versus what like some other governors are saying, I'm like, I'm really glad I live in California.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I definitely think a lot of governors just kind of threw caution to the wind and reopened way too quickly without solid plans in place.
Yeah.
And I did read through Newsom's plan, and it is solid. The thing I would like to see is more of timelines on there,
Yeah.
and the thing that, like I said, was worrying me is that a lot of it was based on testing and numbers, but these testing numbers are going to be skewed based on the ramping up of the tests that we're doing. And so in my head, I was like, wow, this could be like literally 6 months before we open if we're still ramping up tests.
Oh, I think it's going to be longer than that, Nick, if I'm honest.
Well, I mean, some things are starting to reopen this Friday, so
Well,
it's not.
I get that, but I think that there's going to be a second surge. I think that, and I guess this is a good time to talk about that. What's the consequence of reopening?
Yeah, so from what I've read of some pretty well-respected microbiologists and people who study infectious disease and epidemics like this, is that they think that this isn't going away until like maybe 60 to 70% of the population gets it.
Yeah, herd immunity.
Right. And so, in my view, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure that this is correct, but the point of the lockdown was to stop a surge from happening all at once so that hospitals could get ready, we could get medical personnel in place, equipment, ventilators, all these things that we need. And as far as I know, besides more streamlined testing, I mean, I think we've pretty much achieved. We have very low hospital capacities, or not capacities, but our hospitals are basically empty. I have like 5-6 nurse friends that I know from work, and they've been almost laid off recently. Like they don't get as many hours. They're on call, or they get.
Let's bring some
canceled.
Context to that. So through our Coffee for the Frontline thing that we've been working on, we've heard from one of the questions that we have for frontline workers that sign up is, have you been furloughed or not? And we've got to hear a bunch of stories. The people that are being furloughed are people who work in ERs and who work in, so there's hardly any car accidents happening. People are not falling off buildings. There are not, work accidents that are happening and stuff like that. And because of that, more people are safe and not getting injured. And so our ERs are empty and there are not people having to be taken care of. And this is the same reason a lot of hospital revenue is down.
Right. Which can kind of tie back into your thing of skewing the numbers where,
right, exactly.
The hospitals get extra money for COVID related things.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, when you have a hospital hurting for money and then, anything COVID related gets extra money, there's potential there for skewing the numbers.
So we have to be very careful, again, in the spirit of paying attention to the nuance in when we're saying that nurses are being laid off and doctors are being laid off, et cetera, we have to be careful to make sure that we understand why that's happening. And it's not happening because we're not getting admissions to hospitals for COVID. It's because we're not getting the other admissions to hospitals.
Which if you reopen, you can make the case that then those other admissions might, restart. And
I know. And it's kind of strange, isn't it, that we want to open those people will go back because then they are, car accidents are happening again and workplace accidents are happening again, which we don't want to happen, but it is a consequence of life.
Right. But here's another kind of perspective on it. There's potentially more people dying from secondary effects also. So we might be down on car accidents or some other things like that, but there's also people not getting detected of early stage cancers or people not getting chemotherapy as regularly as they need to. I saw something yesterday that I think there was a 60% decline of people getting their chemo last month.
Right.
And people might not be going to the doctor as much for whether it's some ailment that they're having. And so there's these secondary effects of, people might be dying from other causes that we're not paying attention to because of this situation.
Right. And again, we don't have data that helps us understand these situations. So while it's likely that I'm sure that that's the case, we continue to fly blind with understanding the ramifications of this until we get a clearer understanding of what those numbers are. And it really does expose how terrible we are at having data that's got integrity. You would think that these hospital systems and a government as rich as the American government would value understanding how this data, the role that this data plays in where they should be allocating funding. And if you have the right to vote in this country, that should be, in any country, that should be a part of your decision making, or at least you should be thinking about it when how are federal funds and local and state funds getting allocated if they can't even understand the data that these decisions are being made on?
Yeah.
It really exposes the system, right?
It does, yeah. And that's the unfortunate part, is a lot of these decisions have been made on inaccurate and, faulty data. But again, it's very complicated. I don't think it's just as simple as, like you said.
We're not here to solve anything. We're just exploring the nuance of all the gray area of all of this.
Yeah. And so, one thing I think, I think if we can kind of, I would agree with you, we need to be cautious. We don't have accurate data, and this thing is dangerous. But I think the side that a lot of people don't understand of what's going on is the economic side. And this is where I kind of get heat, because people think like, oh, it's, you're putting like the economy or jobs before like people's lives. Nick.
You've got no heart, you cold, heartless human. For anyone who doesn't know Nick, you couldn't be further from the truth. If you, I was clearly joking. This is a very intentional, thoughtful, compassionate, empathetic human. He thinks. That's the other thing that I want to put onto this. He's a deep thinker. So before anyone attacks Nick online or anything like that, don't. Just hear what he's got to say. I'm really excited about hearing your answer to this question. What does it look like for you? And I guess this is where we can start so that we can go on to the economics. What does it look like for you if we were to open the country back up? Or let's not say the country. Or let's say your local economy.
So it's actually, I think it might be a little bit honestly too late. I don't even know if opening up at this point matters that much.
Why do you say that?
Well, I don't know if you pay attention to like the stock market or anything, but
I'm not smart enough for that.
Okay, so basically we had like a massive sell-off last month.
Yep.
In April and in part of March.
That's the opposite to a rally, right?
Yeah, so the stock market crashed essentially. Like anyone with retirements saw like their retirements just, disintegrating. Yeah. And that really drives a lot of panic for people, and that would put a lot of pressure on people to like be more wanting to open the economy sooner and all that. But essentially what we've had happen is a major stimulus by the government to the tunes of trillions of dollars and massive amounts of money printing by the Federal Reserve. And that's basically caused the stock market and the perception that everything is fine to kind of, everything's kind of bounced back. Like the stock market's back almost to its all-time highs, despite everything that's going on. And we've gotten these stimulus checks, which actually I haven't gotten mine, but what's happening is we're destroying future growth and potential for the future of this country. And it's especially bad for millennials. I don't know if you're a millennial or not.
Oh, I really appreciate that you asked that question. I'm very much a Gen Xer, but I really appreciate that
Okay.
question. You are a
Yeah.
millennial.
So I'm not even sure what the millennial range is, but basically,
Anyone who's up to 41 years old this year,
okay.
40 years old. If you're 40 or younger, then you're a millennial.
So millennials have gotten doubly screwed. I mean, this is like possibly the first generation since the last 100 years where we're going to end up worse off than our parents.
Right.
I mean, when I was graduating high school or people were graduating college was right when the Great Recession hit and the economy collapsed. And I mean, literally, a lot of these millennials were just getting back on their feet, like starting to get jobs or thinking about buying houses. And now we get hit with, the 2020 pandemic that is just
Which we're all
set.
getting hit with, right?
Yeah.
We're all getting hit with it, not just millennials, but we're all getting
Everyone is, yeah, but they're especially vulnerable because they're in that stage of life where you're starting to transition to, more of a middle class, like trying to claw your way up out of, that
Student
poverty
debt.
range. Yeah. So it's just really sad to see that this entire generation, I think like 70 million people, is going to be just royally screwed, basically. And
I could hear what you were thinking there. You were thinking royally fucked.
Yeah, I forgot I'm on
that.
your podcast.
You can say whatever the fuck you want on this podcast, mate.
I was going to ask before, and I was like, oh wait, it's Lee.
No, it's Lee.
Yeah, so yeah, we're definitely royally fucked. I mean,
yeah.
it's pretty sad. I mean, we make less money than our parents did.
Yep.
Everything costs 10 times more. I mean, I think back to my dad's generation. I mean, in the 80s, he could buy a house for 100 grand. College was free. I mean, money was like plentiful. And here we are, can barely pay our rent in an apartment.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I want to add some context to that because this is why our conversations are so great, because we see it's a 3D conversation. So me as a Gen Xer, 45 years old, and people who are older than me, the context that we come up with is if we are royally fucked through this, and a lot of us are, our ability to reinvent ourselves, and this is the frame of mind for some people, not me, but some people, and a big chunk of people, is we have a much more limited opportunity to reinvent our situation than millennials do.
Yeah.
We don't have as long to be able to restock our retirement as what millennials will have. We're all fucked is basically what I'm saying. So if you, again, it's that whole thing of if I'm just me as my family going to the park, I don't see what the problem is. But when we take that in the context of you're not the only family, or I'm not the only family, and there are at least another 100 families that want to go use the park at the same time as me. Once we have the bigger picture context, we start to see the nuance and the complexity of the situation, right? So what I would love to see is how do we come together to make a more layered approach to, first of all, can we take care of each other so that we lower the panic level? Because there's still varying levels of panic that people are experiencing. There's this idea of, but I'm going to lose everything that I worked so hard for. And I get that. The theme of everything right now seems to be death. And it's not just human death. It's the death of ego. It's the death of wealth. It's the death of materialism. It's the death of so much. It's the death of control, right? We have to give up so much right now. But the one thing we don't have to give up, the thing that we can grow, is our compassion for each other. So if I have a pound of flour and you need a pound of flour, right? I don't have to give you a whole pound of flour, but I can give you a quarter of a pound of flour. And I know that that's not going to fulfill your whole needs, But giving you a quarter of a pound of flour keeps you fed, and it doesn't get you off the poverty line. But it does mean that I've gone a small way to helping you.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of that in this. I think that's something good that's coming out of this is I've seen a lot of people kind of coming together to help each other and
Right.
finding ways of,
Then where's
being
the
more
panic coming
compassionate.
from, Nick? That's a part of it that I really am struggling with understanding. If we're all fed and none of us can get kicked out of our homes, right? So if we're fed and we can't get kicked out of our homes, where's the panic coming from if this lasts another 2 or 3 months? Help me understand.
I think like most panic is just from the fear of the unknown. I think a
Okay.
lot of people don't know what life's going to look like in a few months. And it's unfortunate, but there's a lot of small businesses that are not going to make it. I mean, there's
Yeah.
been some government assistance, but I don't know how many of your listeners understand like the payroll protection program or not, but essentially that is a loan to help pay for employees. And if you use it for payroll, then it can be given as a grant. So basically the government's giving you money to keep your staff on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. And I think that's a good first step. But the thing that a lot of people don't realize is most small businesses and actually even big businesses are in an extreme amount of debt.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there's no assistance right now for how to navigate out of this debt. And most companies don't have enough cash to float through like 2 or 3 months of reduced revenue, let alone a complete closure. So when I'm looking over in our center and we see like this little nail salon, this little barber shop, this other massage place, like they're all been closed for several months, and who knows how long before they can reopen. They may not reopen. There's not, because
Right.
if you can get a loan, but you have to pay that back, and that's just piling on more debt than they've already gone into this with.
So I had a conversation with Mikey Eggett a couple of weeks ago, and he's someone who has built businesses, pop-up businesses that have lasted 12 to 24 months deliberately for that amount of time, and now he's working as an executive chef for one of the most respected restaurant groups in Australia, for Maryvale. So he's been on both sides of all of this as a business owner and as an employee. And in our conversation, we were talking about this being a great reckoning for our industry. And I can't talk about other industries because I haven't been in them other than the music industry. And I don't want to talk about the music industry right now. Let's talk about the coffee industry. I've been thinking about this idea of a reckoning, right?
I think you've been thinking about it for a while.
Yeah. You and I have had conversations about it.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm going to come off sounding like a total bitch right now. So please, if you hear this and think I'm a bitch, listen to my podcast more, because you'll come to see that, Nick, I'm not, right?
No.
But what I'm going to say is going to sound like I'm being a bitch, and I'm really not. I think this is the reckoning that our industry needed. And the reason I say that is not because I want businesses to fail. And I've said this many, many times. I want every business that exists in our industry to thrive and be successful. But because of the low barrier to entry for our industry, all you have to have is money to open up a business. You don't have to have an understanding of a duty of care to the supply chain. You don't have to have an understanding of leadership and duty of care to your employees. You don't have to have really an understanding of anything. How to read financial statements, how to run a business, nothing. And what this pandemic has done has exposed what is a fucking terrible model of running businesses in our industry. You cannot have a business or a model that runs on an average of 3% of profit if people are doing well, with such high labor costs, but yet the employees are getting paid such shit money, and we expect our customers to subsidize our employees' wages, and those businesses are still running at 3% net profit.
It's pretty shocking.
So I really do feel like this is a reckoning, and this is where people are going to think she's such a conservative. I'm absolutely not. I think you could align me more with someone like Thanos right now than a Republican. But what I'm saying is the businesses that shouldn't be open, that haven't been doing business really well, them closing as a result of this is going to mean that the businesses that have been running really well, because they treat their customers well, they run their businesses as a tight ship, they treat their staff well, they're going to get more foot traffic, they're going to get more patronage. And so hopefully their profit margins will go up because there's less competition. I'm not anti-competition. I think it's a great thing. But we don't have a system set up in our industry that works well by any stretch.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I know it's like that in the restaurant industry as well, where,
Yeah.
I mean, cafes, restaurants, they run on razor thin margins. I mean, it's amazing, looking at our own numbers, how much money we could bring in and how little profit comes out of that. And like you said, it just something doesn't add up, because, wages aren't fantastic. I mean,
they're not even
good.
I
mean, I think we pay pretty decently for the industry, but at the end of the day, it's not a livable wage.
Right.
And on top of that, our expenses are through the roof, and then you have this minimal amount of profit coming in, and then now on top of this, you're going to have limited seating, probably 25 or 50% capacity for the next year or two. It's going to be, I don't know how a lot of businesses will survive without, some meaningful changes to their infrastructure, or everything pretty much.
So in this, and I'm really glad you bring up that whole opening back up thing, at limited capacity, right? So this is another part of the model that I don't understand with cafes and restaurants going back. So if we are running at a razor thin margins, so for anyone who is listening to this and doesn't understand, the operating costs and things like that, just a very quick thing. You might look at a latte and say, well, it only costs, let's say on the expensive side, it costs $1 cost of goods to make a latte. So clearly you're making lots of money by selling that latte at $5, right? But that's the cost of goods. So it's the beans, it's the milk, it's the cup, and it's the water, right? The cost of goods that go into the physical product you can see. Separate of that is fixed costs. Now, whether you sell one latte, sell a million lattes, or no lattes, the fixed costs, which is your rent and your wages and your insurance and all of that kind of stuff, that has to get paid. So your latte costs, from a cost of good perspective, those are one thing. But your fixed costs are the real drain on a business. So here's my question, Nick, and I'm going to predict that you don't have an answer to this, but I want to explore it with you. So if we've got 3% net profit on the generous side for a business, and they have to pay 50% or whatever tax on that 3%. Now, if those businesses are running at maximum capacity as a best case scenario, and then we tell them you can only operate at 50% capacity or 25% capacity, what the fuck kind of a chance do they have at surviving if at full capacity they're only getting 3% net profit?
There's, I saw an article yesterday from a restaurateur who has 15 restaurants, who was saying that he thinks half the restaurants may never either reopen or.
I think half is being generous.
Right. So who knows? But I mean, a lot of businesses aren't going to make it, and that's kind of where it ties into this whole balance of, where do we draw the line between the maximum number of lives that, are willing to be risked when reopening the economy versus like destroying people's livelihoods or destroying jobs. And, there needs to be some analysis on like, where do we draw the line between what's acceptable, what's not? Because at the end of the day, it's not like we let people drive cars knowing that, 50,000 people a year will die in an auto accident. So, we can that there's some cost to going about life. And so we need to find where that balance is.
Well, I think it's a very brave person that wants to come out and say, we're prepared to accept this many deaths.
Yeah. It's not a nice thing to talk about, but
No.
it's a reality of, because we have to understand that when we reopen, like this will spread more and more people will die. It's just really unfortunate, but
what?
Well, it's
But
like
it's
I was
the
saying
actuality
earlier,
of it.
it's the reality of it. I mean, like most respectable microbiologists are saying that the way microbiology works, this thing is not going away until
Right.
potentially a vaccine, which even may not work because this is already mutated. So now we're
Right.
identifying new strains of it. So this may need to become like a seasonal vaccine type of thing, like the flu.
And they
So
failed badly at that anyway.
exactly.
I remember last year when I heard that 430 people died in San Diego from the flu. I'd never paid attention
Yeah.
to how many people die from the flu every year. And somebody said that to me. I'm like, people die from the flu? What?
Yeah. Something
And
like
that's such a
50,000 a year die of the flu.
Yeah.
In the
In the
US.
US. In the US. So, okay. If we say we're going to we should open up local economies. Let's just look at our industry. If we know that even by opening these businesses back up, they're going to fail, most of them, what would be the point of opening them up?
Giving it a chance, I guess. I mean,
so where's the risk versus the reward there?
So I guess, I don't know, maybe this is like just not a good way of looking at it. It's possible, but in my opinion, because I am kind of going by that idea that we need to develop a herd immunity, I don't see the advantage of staying closed indefinitely. I think we need to be smarter as a population. I think Americans are extremely unhygienic. It's just the reality of it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at I was talking about this the other day. Tokyo's only had around 100 deaths. And it's the most populated, dense city in the world, and that's probably due to the fact that they're extremely clean and hygienic. They don't shake hands.
They are experiencing a surge right now, though.
Okay, so
because
I'm sure,
they went back. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's what we're seeing everywhere when they're opening the lockdowns. They are, there are surges. Yeah, and so I think that's the reality. But I think it's interesting to see how, a country that does have more hygienic practices and, if we need to wear face masks and wash your hands more and social distance, like I think those are the appropriate measures we take. But at some point, like, either we develop a herd immunity or we figure out a vaccine. But I don't see how indefinitely closing anything, changes.
Well, indefinitely closing things, if we just ask the question, like, what's the point of closing things right now? And going back to a comment that you made earlier is about the intention of why we were flattening the curve. So I tried to find what the intention was behind the stay-at-home orders, right? And you're right, part of it was to kind of stagnate the influx of people into our hospitals because we wanted to avoid what happened in New York.
Yeah.
And that was one part of the reasons. But another part of it is it gives them some room to understand what this is and how serious it is. And, but you're hearing things of this isn't what they thought it was in the beginning.
Yeah.
They're talking about it being a respiratory disease, but there are doctors that are reporting as whistleblowers that they're finding that this is more like something that your lungs are reacting in the same way as if you undergo barometric, I can't remember the term, but when you go to altitude and your lungs just give up really quickly. So one thing we do know is that we don't know enough.
Yeah.
And so the reason that they put in a shelter-in-place order is multifaceted. So when Ben Shapiro turns around and says, I understand the reason that we did this was so that we could, make sure that our hospitals weren't overwhelmed. He's not incorrect, but that's not the whole story, right? We don't understand enough of this virus yet. We don't understand enough of how it's transmitted to other people. And I think that what our leaders are trying to do, and I am giving them the benefit of the doubt here, they're trying to understand as much as they can. Are they doing that quickly enough? Who knows? Given that it takes 20 years to get most trials through the FDA system, we are putting a lot of pressure on a system that is really broken to start with. So there's a stress test happening on leadership right now. The Constitution is experiencing a stress test. All of these governmental systems like the FDA and the CDC and the WHO, they're all experiencing stress tests right now. A lot of them are failing. And part of what I'm hearing from and what I'm observing from people that are saying, like, let's open things back up, is in reaction to like a subconscious awareness that everything's broken. Our governments have failed us. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. So why don't we just take control and open everything back up and see what happens? Have I misread that?
I think that's reasonable. I think it's not far off. That's something that I think I probably internally feel, is that the system is just completely failed. Yeah, it's just, but again, I don't necessarily have the right answers, or I don't necessarily know that, one way is better, one way is not. I think only in hindsight we'll know. But, I think it is important to look at how, the economy and the future of our jobs, our businesses do affect people's health too. I mean, there is relatively good data looking back that when things are economically bleak, that people's health suffer, that, depression goes up. And, I know I have a lot of friends with anxiety right now whose anxieties are like through the roof, just with all the uncertainty and it's, people getting divorces and just
aren't they all solvable problems though? Aren't those things aren't they things that we can be functionally addressing right now?
Maybe, but it's just from just a overall government perspective. I mean, coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, we've been having reckless monetary policy for the last 10 years. Like, we just print money. The Federal Reserve, I don't want to make this into like an economics thing, but you've seen exponential growth in the last 11 years, but that was driven by a lot of very reckless financial policy.
Right.
Our government debt is 24 trillion before this started, and now it's going to be pushing 30 trillion by the end of the year. So, I mean, this is money that the government's loaning on your head, on our heads. Like, every citizen is now, I think, over $200,000 in debt by the government, essentially, meaning the government's anticipating that they'll get that money off of your head. So it's, sorry, my phone's ringing.
It's totally fine.
So I don't know that, yes, like, a lot of problems are solvable, but at the end of the day, I mean, this could mean like the end of our country as we know it, as being like a global superpower. I mean, a lot of other countries are also screwed, but I mean, this is pretty bad in terms of what we've been doing and what we're now doing in order to keep things afloat. And some people argue that it's necessary that we continue printing trillions of dollars, even though the economy or the country is severely in debt already. But again, only in hindsight will we know whether this was like the appropriate response or whether we're just, indebting our children and grandchildren to, some poor fate.
Did you hear the story that I was telling yesterday about Sold Out Gone Fishing?
No. Was it on the Daily Coffee
Yeah.
Pro or? Okay, no, I didn't see it yet.
I'm going to tell it to you quickly because I think that it's poignant to this discussion from that perspective. So there's a guy who's going to a country called, my mum told me this story at a time when I was setting up my business so that she could keep me grounded, I guess, and give me some perspective. I think you'll appreciate this. So a man was on his way to Adelaide, which is a capital city of a state in Australia, South Australia. And on his way, somebody told him about this pie shop in Adelaide. But they said to him, you have to get there really early because when this guy sells out of pies, he closes the shop. So just make sure you get there early. So the guy goes and he lands in Adelaide and he's like, well, I'm here in the morning. It's 10:30. I'm just going to go straight to the pie shop before my meeting. And he's only there for a day. It's 10:30 in the morning. He gets to the pie shop and there's a sign up and it says, sold out, gone fishing. This guy scratches his head and he's like, it's 10:30 in the morning. Like, why is this guy sold out of pies? I'm going to come back tomorrow. I'm going to extend my trip a little bit. He comes back the next morning at 9:30. There's a sign up there, sold out, gone fishing. He's like, I have to taste these pies now. The third morning he comes back at 7:30 and there's one pie left. And he buys the pie and he tastes it and it is so good. He says to the person who sold him the pie, is this your shop? And he says, yeah, it's my shop. He's like, are you the only one that works here? He's like, yeah. He's like, mate, you could make a killing out of these pies. They're so good. Why don't you just make more pies? If you know that you could sell more pies, why wouldn't you make more pies? And he says, listen, I know exactly how much money I need to make to run this business, save for retirement, and have a little bit extra in case everything falls over. I make exactly the number of pies that I need to sell to make that happen. And as soon as the last pie is sold, I close the shop and I go and do the thing that I really love doing, fishing. And, and so he says to the man, you just bought the last pie. I need you to leave. I've got to go fishing. I use that story to help me understand when is enough enough. And I think here in America that we've kind of lost what the end game is. What is the end game? Because enough doesn't seem, we can't satiate our need to make money. We can't satiate our need to have more power, to have more money, to have more like dominance and all of that kind of stuff. This pandemic perhaps affords us the opportunity to see how many pies we need to make and to start asking ourselves, well, what's my gone fishing?
Yeah.
We need to make the pies. We need to be responsible. We need to take care of business and have stuff left over for a rainy day, right? But we need to start making room for going fishing. And I wonder if we're not being given a gift in this moment to start asking ourselves that question. Does America really need to be focusing on being a superpower right now? Or does America need to be focusing on how do we just make sure that everyone has enough so that we can lower their anxiety right now? People don't need to be rich right now. People don't need to have anything more than to know that their bellies are going to be filled and they're not going to be kicked out of their homes. Because the people who are responsible for taking care of figuring out this virus were going to conspire to their success as well. Right now, I feel like and I don't know, I may so be well off the fucking track with this, but I wonder if we go back to business the way that we want to go back to business, and I want to as well. Don't get me wrong. I want this country to get back. I want the whole world to get back into the swing. But do we then get in the way of the people who are trying to figure out what's going on with the virus? Are we getting in their way by doing this prematurely? I think I just sounded like a mad woman.
No, I think you bring up a good point. I like that story. It really shows how little of us have intention behind what we do. And I think if we spent a little bit more time being more intentional about what we want in our lives, instead of just pursuing like that endless pursuit of profit that drives American economics. It's just this sad reality of it, but we have that throwaway culture of every year you need that new iPhone, and every company needs to grow indefinitely. And so, at what cost do what, there's a Bible verse I really like. It's, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? And it's, something I think about often.
Yeah.
Where, where do you draw that line? And I like that story. I think it's a good point.
It's a great business story, isn't it?
It is. It is.
And when my mum told me that story, it wasn't told to her as a business story. She heard it on the radio. But it's a really great business story, huh?
Yeah. No, I think it's very important for people to consider that.
Now more than ever, I think.
I think this is helping people kind of reassess. I was talking to my wife. It is nice spending more time at home and with our daughter, and just, going on walks and around the neighborhood. And it's just affording us that to do those kind of things that I wasn't able to do before because I was at work all day. And, now with things having slowed down and whatnot, I have more time to be at home. And so, there is a silver lining.
Why would you want to give that up?
It's pretty hard being at home too. I definitely feel for my wife. Like, taking care of our daughter is not easy, especially being cooped up, like not being able to go anywhere.
Yeah.
We've had to think of some pretty elaborate ways of keeping her entertained while on this lockdown. So.
And then on the other side of that, we have people who are forced to stay at home that are in very dangerous situations as well. Again, we dig into this nuance of there are some people who live with dangerous spouses or with dangerous parents.
Interesting.
And this lockdown forces them to look at the reality of the situation that they're choosing to remain in.
Yeah.
And I'm going to sound like a callous bitch right now, but I think that we are all being given the opportunity right now to look at the quality of our lives, and are we happy with that and what we've created for ourselves. And the part I think that polarized me so much by seeing so many protests is, why would you give that up when we haven't I don't know that we've received the benefits that we could be receiving from this moment of pensiveness.
Yeah.
I think people are heading into the discomfort of seeing the shitty reality that they've created for themselves, and they're trying to run from it.
That's a very good point. It's definitely this has definitely made people have to do some soul searching and, reassess your life. I know the other day you were talking about how much you love coffee, and whether people were going to change their opinion about being in this industry. And I think that ties into what you're saying. I think this will give a lot of people time to reassess of, is this what you want to be doing? Is this how you want to spend your life? I think this ability to slow down and just kind of tune out some of the noise that we're so used to every day is a lot of people that luxury to reassess.
We hopefully will never get this opportunity again. And I say that,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not happy that we have been forced into this because of a virus. I'm also not unhappy that we've been forced into this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good catalyst for change. I mean, you and I have talked about this in person, over the last year, where, like you said, like there's many shops and different businesses that frankly shouldn't be open because it's a parody of what coffee should be. And it's like you said, anybody with a little bit of money now can open a shop and, not really have the intention of building a community or, serving people, serving the supply chains, and just,
or a great balance sheet or profit and loss statement. Like that's as valid a part of running a business as the idea of community and like a good business should have a strong profit and loss statement and good balance sheet.
Yeah.
And there's nothing shameful about that. That's a part of being a great, responsible leader.
I mean, it's a necessity. You can't keep going on with your business if it's not balanced. You need to be able to make money. Unfortunately, that's the reality of it. Money is what drives, it's the mechanism how we operate this world.
Let's say that they don't extend the next stay-at-home order. Am I using the right terminology? Shelter in place?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So let's say they don't extend it, the next shelter in place order, and we are forced to go back. Well, they want to find a way to restart everything. An interesting discussion that's starting to rage in our industry that really plays into some of the things that you've been talking about on social media is the disconnect between people's paychecks versus their unemployment checks.
That's yeah.
And so this is something that we have to consider as an industry okay, we're going to open things back up, but there are unintended consequences of this pandemic on business.
Yeah.
And one of those unintended consequences is that the veil has been lifted on all the fuckery in our industry, a lot of it anyway. And one of those forms of fuckery is that most of the people employed in cafes aren't on a livable wage. And if they're earning double what they're getting in their paychecks on unemployment,
yeah,
why would they go back to work?
I wouldn't.
Neither would I.
I don't. And I've been talking about this for a while. It's, I would almost make the same amount of money just going on unemployment, and just not working at this point.
Yeah.
So, and that's like being a business. I know for a lot of my employees, they'd be making more money just going on unemployment. Luckily, all of them have decided it.
But that's a testament to your leadership, Nick. And I know that you will never cop to that, but this is why I'm such a big advocate of great leaders. When you raise a workforce that gets life currencies more than money, and you're cultivating more wealth in things like peace of mind and safety and security and purpose and all that kind of stuff, staying at work is about more than money.
Yeah, I think a lot of our employees have just been really grateful to just have something to do, someplace to go, to connect with their coworkers. And a lot of people have felt very lonely and anxious and, being in isolation. And so we've only had, I think, 2 employees that voluntarily didn't want to work because they lived with high-risk people. But everyone else has basically been fighting for hours because they want to be at work and, obviously still bring in a paycheck. And I'm actually just so grateful for our staff because when this whole thing started, I don't know if I publicly said this yet, but my wife's actually pregnant again.
Congratulations.
And, thank you. So we found out literally like the week before this started, and she
Oh,
was
wow.
so sick for the last month, and
Oh, no.
I could barely leave the house, just because I had to take care of our daughter, and
Hmm.
my wife was extremely nauseous. And our staff just like totally stepped up. Our two managers kind of, took charge, and just it was just amazing to see everybody just kind of come together, like be leaders in
Proud
themselves.
Papa
And
Bear moment.
yeah, exactly. So so I'm just getting back to work now in the last week or so, and like it's just amazing when you have a good staff and
Yeah.
you can come back and things are running well. And um, so I mean, your people are just the most important part of a business. And like you said, this is an interesting time because how do you justify, you know, it's just like harsh reality where it's like you want your people to make as much money as you can,
Yeah.
but when they can make more on unemployment and you aren't even making, barely enough to pay the bills, like it's a weird situation, I'm sure, for a lot of business owners right now.
And we're hearing, I mean, I'm fielding phone calls from people saying that employees, baristas are just lazy, entitled, expletive, 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 expletive. I mean, expletives that I won't even say, so you can imagine what they are.
Wow.
I know, right? I love that you said wow. They're really angry that their workforce is asserting a right, which really speaks to what kind of a leader they are in the first place, right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
What do you think? How do you think this is going to play out and shake out?
Like so many variables of unknowns. I'm not sure. I feel like I might be in some of a bubble because I'm just honestly, knock on wood, I'm so grateful right now to be like in the situation with the staff we have. I mean, we've
That
gone
didn't come
through.
from nothing. Like you worked and really hard at creating what you've got, the
Yeah, it took a
relationships
long
with them,
time.
right?
Like we've been open 6 years and we've gone through cycles of having crazy turnover and just a lot of, drama among our staff. And, it's been
Yeah.
very cyclical, but right now we're at a place where we have good leaders and just good employees. And, it's amazing just the companionship and um, the way everyone works together. It's just really wonderful here. So I can't say clearly if my perspective will be accurate because I know a lot of other shops, a lot of baristas are really unhappy, and there's already turmoil between them and management. And I'm sure this is just going to be like a nail in the coffin for a lot of employees and
And
business owners.
businesses.
Yeah.
There's me being all Thanos again, saying, well, I think it needs to happen.
Yeah. I mean, it probably does. It's because the reality is like a lot of people are not investing in their employees, and it's just, I mean, I see when I get interviewees coming in where I talk to them and they're just so discouraged with their previous management or their business owners. And a lot of people just feel like their employers just don't care about them at all. And it's sad to see. I hope that's not the case with ours. I don't think it is, but
Your employees are behind you in the cafe working while you're on a podcast. And I mean, it speaks a whole bunch about what's going on with your little ecosystem right there.
yeah, yeah. It's honestly, I'm really grateful. It's fantastic but like you said, it's taken a long time. I mean, there was 3 years where I was working like 7 days a week in the cafe, and just trying to plug holes and keep things afloat. And
I remember
so,
we had conversations during those times where we
yeah, we
were
did.
talking about some strategies on like how you can show your staff that you appreciate them and how you can show them what your intentions are. I mean, it's and I'm going to talk about this next week in the thing. Leadership is a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
And you have to learn to lead yourself before you can master leading other people.
Absolutely.
But it's an intentional journey to go on, right?
Of course, it's fantastic. I think whether regardless of what position you are, barista, employee, owner, like everybody's a leader in their own right.
Oh
And
yeah, 100%. So with regards to this, I anticipate that 8 out of 10 businesses in our industry are not going to open again. So let's talk about well, that's definitely the numbers that I'm experiencing when I talk to cafe owners around the world. About 8 out of 10
So
of those.
you've heard from owners that might not reopen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it speculatively just from visiting some local shops and talking to their employees that I'm guessing they aren't going to make it.
Yeah.
But that's interesting that you've heard directly from some people.
Yep. I've heard directly from people who are saying we're not going to open again. I've heard from people who have said to me, you know what, don't judge me, but I'm going to just, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm going to use the pandemic as an excuse to not open. And you know what, take the moment. If you want to do that, do it.
I think it's a little way of softening a lot of people don't want to say close or do something because of their pride. And, closing your business you have to admit to yourself that you failed.
Yeah. And it's not failing.
It's not failing, but I think people perceive it that way. And this is like you said, a good time to you've been given like a second chance just to reassess and find what you want to do.
So businesses will fail. Let's say 8 out of 10 of them will close and not reopen again. We end up with 80% of the workforce that was employed before having to make a decision, should they be in coffee or shouldn't they be in coffee? And let's say a portion of those decide to go and find jobs elsewhere. What ends up happening best case scenario, we don't see a second surge with the virus, with the pandemic. But what happens if we do? In your mind, like in this idea of opening up? And again, my brain doesn't work well. I'm not unintelligent, but when it comes to stuff like economics, I absolutely am. In the sense that I'm great at maths, but not at that kind of maths. So I'm going to need you to help me with this. When it comes to, okay, we're going to open stuff up. Those 20% of the businesses that are going to have a go at getting things back, they do that. They re-employ people, those who want their jobs back. From an economic perspective, what happens if that starts to, and then a couple of weeks later, we start to see a surge?
Yeah, that's something a lot of people are worried about. And I think realistically, it might be something like a seasonal surge. Like it seems like a lot of people think this might return in the fall. So becoming something like almost like a seasonal flu. And I don't know if we have to close down again or whatnot. I think the interesting thing is that some businesses are thriving in this. And I don't know if you have Starbucks near you, but their drive-throughs are like just packed all the time.
Yep.
And they seem well positioned to handle this because for the last several years, they've only opened drive-through locations. They've, being a publicly traded company, they need to maximize transactions and numbers, but they've been well positioned for this.
None of my clients have closed. All of my clients are at least at 70% capacity. At least. Most of them are running their businesses at almost full capacity. But we saw this coming from early February. I had been preparing all of my clients since then.
Yeah. So that's something that people need to get ready for, and that's something that we're still working on. I have to say we're a little slower to the draw of like integrating, we had deliveries and mobile orders and stuff, but we don't have like apps set up where people can order from like their app or something, which we're going to be working on. But that's also the reality of I think what this industry is going to have to transition to. And we've talked a lot about automation coming into the shop. And so I think this is going to be that catalyst where automation is going to be more readily accepted. And, I hope that doesn't displace too many jobs, but,
It will.
that's likely the reality. Our particular business is built more around hospitality and like our community. So I'm slower to, you know, replace a barista for like a robotic arm or something like that. But
you'll adapt. You'll find different ways to, I mean, hospitality is in both parts of your culture, like all three parts of your culture, Lebanese, Argentinian, right? Brazilian,
yeah.
And well, not so much in the American side of things, but both of those two other heritage cultures are heavily steeped in hospitality, and your business is built on it between like what you and your mum bring to it. It's the core values of what your business is. You'll just find other ways to adapt to that. Even if it's like a machine that's making the coffees, you'll still find a cool way to have hospitality as a part of that. Well, just like anyone who hasn't been to TruBru, I remember being there, being so fascinated by how in one corner you've got all these retirees. That's a hard word for Australians to say. There's too many R's in there. And then from the other perspective, you've got like college students everywhere. And then you've got people standing there like drinking wine together.
Yeah, it's a pretty diverse group. And that's my favorite part about being in this industry. You had a podcast the other day where you talked about how much do you like coffee, and I think I did what you said to reflect on it. So good job with this.
Thanks,
but
man.
That was one thing that I really felt like makes me love coffee even more is the fact that it draws a community around it, and it's a vessel. The coffee itself is kind of like a vessel that we could spread that love and just connect with our communities and in a meaningful way.
Do we, as a result of this, do we end up, I can say this better, how do we find a way to encourage our workforce and our community of business owners to adapt and find a better way to emerge out of this than sit around and look at the destitute situation that we're in? Because look, I think that we were in this position beforehand, and now we're just seeing it.
I think this is just exposing everything that was already happening, even with larger companies. Like I was saying, like a lot of companies were just on the verge of bankruptcy already. Like these retailers, I mean, they were ready to keel over. This was just like, the nail in the coffin for them. But again, in times of hardship, there's always companies that will thrive and come out, like out of the 2008 crisis. I think like Uber and Airbnb and some of these other, brilliant new companies with innovative ideas came out of, that financial crisis. And I think in the same way, if we can innovate in meaningful ways in the coffee industry right now, I think there's a lot of opportunity to be had. I don't necessarily know what that looks like yet. I think there's a lot of unknowns. Like I don't even know with coffee pricing if do you know, like, is pricing going down? Is it going up? I don't know what the
so commodity coffee pricing, the prediction is commodity coffee pricing is going to go up. Specialty coffee is going to be in less demand because we don't know what's going to happen with the logistics and the labor forces around there. But a lot of these questions are going to be answered when Jamie and Christopher talk at the sourcing day at a new coffee industry 3-day event that's happening next week. It's free. Anyone who wants to join, sign up because you get access to the content for free. We've had hundreds of people sign up already, which is fantastic.
Nice. Yeah, I'll be there for sure.
Yeah, and they're going to teach people like cafe owners like you who want to go direct to the farmer and purchase direct from the farmer. They're going to teach you how to do it no matter how small a quantity of coffee that you buy is. But they're also going to talk, and the reason we delayed it from happening when it was originally going to happen, which was at the time of SCA, we deliberately delayed it so that we could integrate the very real life things that are going on with COVID-19 that have changed our industry permanently. We could make sure that we include those questions in what they're going to address during the conversation. And pricing is a question that we have been inundated with about, like, is coffee going to get more expensive? Well, it's a very complex thing that involves supply and demand. It involves the US dollar. It involves, how this virus plays out from a healthcare perspective locally to origin countries. And the fourth variable in there is understanding the logistical limitations in origin country and within the receiving country, the consumer end country, what the logistical limitations are going to be experienced that either drive pricing up or pricing down, so that all of that's affected. So they're the four variables that are going to be. I'm working on a blog post to talk about that, and I'll finish it after that workshop. But we don't know is the short answer.
Yeah,
like
that's
with
what
a lot of
I
this.
found interesting is, there's a lot of been curious about that because I'm sure demand has plummeted, but I'm sure the supply chain disruptions are going to be adding to the cost. So I guess it's, to be seen what's going to happen with coffee pricing.
Yeah. The other interesting part about it is that commodity coffee demand has actually skyrocketed.
Yeah.
Some predict in the realm of 400%.
Interesting. C price doesn't seem to be that much higher.
It's higher than it was this time last year, because this time last year it was anywhere between 85 and 90.
Yeah.
And so now it's it's kind of teetering between 110 and 130.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit high. It's still nowhere near the cost of production. But they're counting on volume, and they're hoping that helps, because Brazil has experienced a killer crop this year. The other thing to keep in mind is that different origins are going to be affected very differently.
Right.
Depending at the time of harvest, and how that clashes with what coffee consuming countries are experiencing from their end. So when you talk about a strategy to reopen local economies, that's going to have an impact on what happens at origin, but much further down the timeline. So what's happening today is affecting origin based on what's happening in their own individual harvest countries. Like, you look at India, we had Ganga Prabhakar on the podcast. Incredible woman. She is like establishing specialty coffee in India. And they're in total lockdown right now. Yeah. But they're lucky enough that they have their workforces on their individual farms. They grow a lot of the food on their farms, so they're able to keep everybody fed, and so social distancing taking place. And so if they are able to maintain the level of specialty quality, her family's farm is predominantly commercial, but if they're able to maintain the level of specialty coffee that they have previously been able to create and export, then that's going to be great for them. But in other origin countries that have migratory workforces, they're going to experience very different issues with regards to specialty coffee, because those workforces, given that specialty coffee is such a labor-intensive commodity or complex agricultural commodity, that's going to mean that some producers are going to turn around and say, well, you know what? All of our crops are going to commodity this year. No specialty coffee this year.
Yeah, just kind of throw it all together this year.
Yeah, and so then that affects someone like you who serves specialty grade coffee and roasts specialty grade coffee, because the demand is exactly where it was before, but the supply may be limited. It's going to put you in an interesting situation. But then if we also think, well, is the demand going to be increased given that so many shops are going to close?
Yeah, I think it's yet to be seen.
It's going to be fascinating to observe what happens over the next 5 years even, as a consequence of what's happening right in this moment. even in
Yeah.
10 years. I think we've accelerated the need for automation in our industry, and we've accelerated the need for a real conversation around livable wages. And who the fuck should be opening businesses anyway? Clearly very passionate about that. I don't want to
Yes.
take away your right to open a business. I just want you to be a more thoughtful business owner by doing what's required to
Yeah.
get yourself educated on that. I'm sure that makes me an asshole, but
Hey,
I'm
that's where
fine
your
with that.
services come in.
Yeah. Lee@mapperforward.org. Shameless plug there. So we're in the last few minutes of our conversation. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to see if there was anything that we haven't talked about when it comes to getting our industry or our local economies restarted that we haven't talked about.
Not sure if we kind of covered a lot of things, but I think just to circle back, I think it's an extremely nuanced situation. I think that we need to be careful going forward, but I think that, again, I think that we do need to move forward. We need to start looking at timelines. This thing might be a reality we live with, and I would just like to say that there are things that people can do to protect themselves and just being healthier in general. I'm going to be releasing a couple things I've been looking into, but one I'll just say right now is that you should be taking vitamin D. If you don't already take vitamin D supplementation or go out in the sun a lot, please start taking it, because there is a lot of evidence that vitamin D deficiency is heavily correlated with mortality and more severe cases of COVID.
Oh, really?
And
do you have some references that you can share with me so that we can put them in the show notes?
Yeah, I'll link the studies, but this has been beyond well documented for SARS-CoV-1, the original one, and now it's being shown to also be the case for this one. So if there's anything you could do right now to bare minimum, start taking vitamin D. There are a few other things.
Bioavailable vitamin D.
Yeah.
People need to understand that not all vitamin D is bioavailable. What that means. Do you want to tell people what that means?
Yeah, I mean, you want to make sure it's something your body could absorb. I use a D3 supplement. Just look for a good brand. I'm going to be releasing a video pretty soon. I've been doing some experiments on myself, testing out different supplements and doing blood work. So
yeah, we'll be sharing that as well.
Yeah, so I think we do need to move forward. We need to be careful. People need to take care of themselves, be healthy, be hygienic, and
wash your damn fucking hands.
Wash your fucking hands. My wife told me that before she met me, like, she never really knew that like washing your hands was important. It's like, it's interesting, but I guess a lot of Americans don't really like think about like washing hands or hygiene in that sense. I hope I'm not offending anyone like with a generalization, but it seems like that might be the case, I think.
And this is where I talk about privilege, right? We have the privilege of information and education and the kinds of ways that we think that leave us open to considering things that other people take for granted. And while it may not be an economic privilege, it's definitely something that gives us an advantage because we know.
Yeah, knowledge is power.
It really is. This is why, like, I'm a massive advocate for think for your fucking self.
Yeah.
You know, think for yourself, get the knowledge that you need to make the best decisions for you. Stop being a part of an ideological team. Get in the center and listen to everything, question everything, and question yourself first.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's paramount. You got to question your own beliefs and opinions. And so I appreciate talking with you. And for those who reached out to me, I think you guys have definitely influenced me. I have changed my opinion somewhat, and I appreciate, the different perspectives.
And that's part of what made this conversation so important for us to have publicly, is because we're not pushing an agenda. We're just exploring ideas and trying to understand what we believe, what is important to us. And for some people, maintaining the wealth, the financial wealth that they have established over the last number of generations or decades or whatever is the most important thing to them. They don't give any fucks about going fishing. Right? And who is anyone to tell them that that's not reasonable? But I mean, I'm certainly not going to sit there and say you're wrong, dude. I don't have the right to say anything like that. But the moment they start putting people in danger, that's a different story.
Yeah.
That's a different story, right? So we just want to take let's just approach it reasonably. Let's be pushing for good testing and data and contact tracing. Wait, actually, that's something we didn't talk about. When it comes to us being libertarians,
Yes, there's a predicament here.
there really is a predicament here. Go for it.
Well, maybe I've watched V for Vendetta one too many times, but I am very skeptical of government overreach, and I think this is something I was talking about, that fear is often a good motivator for government to step in and start
Take
overreaching.
away your civil liberties.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to come off like as like a conspiracy theorist or anything, but I mean, this is a reality we saw with 9/11 and
the Patriot Act.
Yes, and the NSA and Edward Snowden and what the government was doing, and so I see how contact tracing is a good step in terms of minimizing contact between infected individuals and stuff, but it also worries me down the line when this infrastructure is in place.
This is another level of the nuance, right? It's like on one side we see that it's important for them to have good data, but in order for them to have good data, they need to be able to track how many people are getting infected. We go back to trust in our leadership. I don't trust that these fuckers in power are not going to take advantage of what they could do with that data.
Yeah.
And they won't use the opportunity to track us beyond COVID-19.
Yeah.
And
in
so
some
that's
sense, we already,
right?
in some sense, we already are kind of just. I mean, our apps are all tracking your movement. I mean, if you go to a store, you might see an advertisement later for that store. I mean, Facebook or Instagram or whatever is knows where you are.
I couldn't believe the other day I went to Home Depot and bought some plants to start growing food at home. And today I see an ad. So the majority of the plants that I bought, all of them except for one, were of one company. And I got an ad today on Instagram for the company that I bought one plant from. How the fuck did they even know that I bought that plant? I didn't Google that. I didn't decide anything I didn't search for anything. I haven't put it in anything.
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, I'm sure everyone's experienced this at this point. If you're on social media, you're going to start seeing ads for things, even if you're just talking about something, you might see an ad for it later. Our phones are listening.
Yep.
And they're tracking. And I mean, it might not be a problem, but it might be a problem. So.
And again, it's nuance, right? So a lot of people are turning around and saying, look, it doesn't matter. They need this to keep us safe. But they said that with the Patriot Act too. They need this to keep us safe. And all the while, they're using it to violate so many people's rights and privacy. And they never give those rights back.
Right. That's the whole argument is like once you give it away, it's incredibly hard to get it back. So
right. So, that's a part of the discussion that there are for and against. This is where you get deep in the weeds with regards to the nuance and the complexity of it, right? We want to do the contact tracing so that we can have better data.
Yeah.
And here we are, like we've just spent the last 2 hours talking about we need better data, we need better data, we need better data, but we don't want you to track us. Even though we know that that's going to be part of giving you the better data. This is why this is such a difficult discussion, right?
Yeah. I think I'm optimistic that it could be done, but I think it needs to be very carefully regulated, and it needs to be done correctly.
By who? The Republicans or the Democrats? That
Preferably
was a tongue
neither.
in cheek. It would be great for it to be neither, but then we would take the assumption that there aren't lobbyists and there aren't corporate interests and there aren't, foreign, superpowers that are trying to get access to playing with all of that. Like we just live in.
Yeah, it's really messed up. We actually, this ties into, I don't know, we probably don't have much time, but with the forced vaccine, or not forced, but mandated vaccines, um, again, it's
Oh, we
like,
can talk about vaccines as much as you fucking want. I have loads to say on this subject.
yeah, I mean, I'm not like an anti-vaxxer. I'm vaccinated. My daughter's vaccinated, but I'm like very against mandated vaccines because
Yeah.
the potential for corruption there by lobbyists and by special interests is just, it's too much to overlook. It's just the way our government's structured is there's so much room for corruption and special interests. So
Yeah.
it's extremely worrisome to me if this becomes a mandated thing
Mm. I mean,
because
go on.
yeah, well, who is in charge of, this committee that decides what vaccine is mandated and what not, and how do you keep, prying pharma companies from slipping money to whoever's in charge of
Yeah.
these to get their vaccine onto the next mandated list of vaccines that are required. It just leaves open a huge door for
Yeah.
potential corruption.
And look, as someone who's a trained scientist, I just want to say, like, I'm not an anti-vaxxer by any stretch. I think that vaccines are a wonderful discovery for humanity. But this pandemic has really brought to life the politics that are involved in vaccines and the massive complexity in vaccine science.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to just make blanket statements of we should vaccinate everyone, anyone who uses the term herd immunity without understanding that herd immunity is a hypothesis, it's not a proven science.
Mm.
So I challenge anyone to find a published article that proves herd immunity is a real thing. Send it to me, please.
Yeah, it would be a hard thing to verify.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So it's one of these things of I want vaccines to work. Again, team human. Like I want us to be protected, but I don't want to be forced to take something that I can't be verified of what the ingredients are in it. And there is a secret vaccine court that never gets to be made public.
Yeah.
That says to me that there's a lot of dodgy shit going on. Now,
Absolutely.
they've been working on this SARS-1 vaccine since 2011 and haven't made any headway with it.
I thought they kind of dropped it. Were they still working on it?
Yeah, so Peter Hotek and his lab are still working on it. They've run into a lot of challenges since 2011 in getting a lot of the stuff approved. So now they're getting some more attention on that side of things.
Yeah.
But since this is related to the SARS-1 virus, they're hoping that there are elements of that will give them a jump start on this new vaccine. But
Yeah.
people need to be very clear on understanding how complex vaccine science is.
Right.
There is a podcast called "This Podcast Will Kill You." It's fantastic. It's run by an epidemiologist and a virologist, and they talk in real life terms. Like they talk in ways that anyone can understand. Listen to their episode on COVID-19. They have a series on COVID-19, and the one about vaccines is actually with Peter Hotek's lab partner. And she talks about the complexities in understanding like why it's so difficult to create a vaccine around this. It depends how you want to approach it. Do you look at the spike protein that triggers your immune response, and do you create a vaccine that's on that side of things? Or do you look at the genetics behind the vaccine and how that relates with your immune system, create a vaccine around that? Or do you create a generic vaccine that just approaches all coronavirus viruses And then you ask the question, well, actually, no one's ever been able to come up with a coronavirus vaccine for any
because there's many
coronavirus.
coronaviruses.
Exactly.
That's
So this
yeah.
is super, super complex. And anyone who's going to be lining up to get that vaccine, more power to you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be waiting.
I put a poll on my Instagram the other day where I said, I asked my friends if, will you take the vaccine if it's developed in the next, say 12 months or so? And most said no. Some said yes, but it is a little bit concerning when, normally it takes 5 to 10 years to get this vaccine to the market, and then you have it in 12 months.
Yeah.
Has it been properly vetted and gone through the correct testing and channels to make sure this is safe before we inject 300
That's
million
fine. You'll
people
just inject some bleach.
Yeah.
Injecting bleach is going to fix everything.
Yeah.
What I think they'll do is they'll turn around and make it so that you can't travel around the country or into the country unless you can prove that you've had the vaccine.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm starting to realize, like, it may mean that I have to leave America.
So you wouldn't take it if it was made relatively soon? Yeah.
I'm responsible for keeping me safe.
Yeah.
And that goes against, look, shame on me as a trained scientist if I just believe the bullshit that's being thrown my way. It's different if you don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Well, we have 2 doctors in our family who both said they wouldn't take it. So, I know there's trained individuals who understand this better than I do, who are saying like it can't be rushed that quickly to be. So.
The quickest vaccine we've ever been able to come up with is the smallpox vaccine, and that was a long, long time ago. And the vaccines that have been easy to develop have all been already developed.
Yeah.
So it's the really complex ones that are taking 20, 30 years to develop.
Yeah.
So thinking that a vaccine is going to come like in 2021, good luck with that.
Yeah. Or good luck taking it if it's here.
Yeah, and we're not trying to scare you. We're just saying to you that this is our perspective as people who we're not conspiracy theorists.
No.
We're thinkers, we're researchers, we're open-minded people who are happy to be proven wrong and are happy to hear real, valid information that can help us be more informed.
Yeah.
And we want to encourage that in our whole coffee community. Right?
Absolutely.
I love you, my friend.
It's so good to talk to you today.
Likewise. I feel like I wish that we lived much closer to each other.
I know.
So that we could have a coffee every other morning and just hang out. But this was a really great conversation. I have learnt a lot in this.
Same here. I appreciate your perspective, honestly.
Ditto, sir. Ditto. Stay safe and stay healthy. And let's talk soon. Let's have a coffee soon. It'd be so great to sit and have a coffee with you. I don't know when that will happen, but let's do it.
Is Steady State open?
They are open for curbside pickup.
Okay.
We may have to curbside pick up and walk across on the opposite sides of the street and yell at each other.
Yeah.